the Trump so-called peace plan and what has happened yesterday, Israeli attack, more than 120 airstrikes in Gaza, and so far we've learned that for more than over 40 Palestinians were murdered by these attacks. And let me ask the simple question that I ask our audience to answer it. Can Israel be compelled to peace through international law? Is that possible? Before going to your answer, here is what we've learned from one of the former Israeli Mossad and IDF member. And he said his point on the so-called peace plan. Here is what he said about how Israel sees the peace plan.
Is Gaza. We have to take the people there and send them to Libya.
What do you see as the future for Gaza?
No future.
A parking lot? A dumping ground?
For what a creative idea.
I do.
Okay, we have agreement. Suddenly they send some missiles. Our people send missiles from inside. And then we said, oh, there is a missile from Gaza. So now we can answer them.
So you think that's also something that's possible?
Everything is possible. We are going to erase Gaza.
Yeah. Coral, what can I think you are the right person to answer how international law could help us in that direction.
Well, Israel and the Palestinian war, in fact, because this is a war that started long ago, about 100 years ago, and that, in fact, became institutionalized since 1947, in fact. And in 1947, we had what we call the modern international international law, where in fact, UN is a fundament of that. And the international relations have been based on this new relationship that we had among nations after World War II. And since 1947, where the resolution 181 of the General Assembly opened the opportunity to have one or two states in Palestine, we have this war and we have this discussion. And in fact, you have hundreds. And in a book that is behind me, unfortunately, it is a French version, but it does exist in English. In this book, I listed all the resolutions that condemned Israel for breaching the international law. There's more than 100 resolutions. In fact, Israel is the country that is the most not sanctioned, does never be sanctioned, but is the country against which you have the most sanction of the whole world since the creation of the UN. Meaning that we know since Israel was created in 1948, but they started to breach the law before because they never accepted, in fact, what Resolution 181 suggested. That means to decide whether one or two countries as a result of referendums. And nobody reads that resolution. So nobody mentioned that. A lot of people think that land was given to Israel. And I remind you, formally, not a single square foot has been given to Israel legally. Not a single square foot. That means that the whole of the territory of Israel, regardless of what you consider as the territory, regardless of whether you take the Palestinian occupied territory as Israeli or not, there is not a single square foot that has been legally gained by Israel. In 1949, as Israel applied to enter the United Nations, it was required to make a declaration according to which Israel would comply with the international law. That means the United Nations rules and international law, as a condition to remain in the UN. As a condition to remain in the UN. Since then, they, as I just said, you have more than 100 resolutions that condemn Israel for non implementing the international law and to breaching the international law. And I'm not even mentioning the number of casualties that are the result of those breaches. That includes massacres, torture, you name it. And nobody has done anything against Israel. You remember how the Western world reacted as Russia started the special military operation. And everybody tried to ban Russia, to restrict flights and visas and everything, to isolate Russia. For Israel, they have killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, probably hundreds of thousands. They have stolen the land. They occupy illegally land, both in West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in the Golan Heights. In Gaza, they occupied and they had to withdraw as a consequence of the Oslo Agreement. But now they are back with all the massacres that we have seen. We see that there is a deliberate intent to destroy people. That was reflected in recent documents of the UN saying that Israel was committing a genocide. But beyond this, merely from a military point of view, if you want, when you want to kill a leader, a Palestinian leader, by using a 1-ton bomb, that means that basically you know that there will be no collateral damages. This is a massacre, and you just hope that the leader of the Palestinian movement is among the casualties or the fatalities, meaning that we are beyond the collateral damages. And surprisingly, half surprisingly, nobody has done anything. We have even countries like Switzerland, Switzerland to some extent, yes, France, Germany, the UK, the US, obviously, who continue to support the Israel and even supply weapons and ammunition to them. So we are in a very strange situation where everybody knows perfectly what happens, because in fact, the purpose of the 7th of October 2023 was for the Palestinian factions, and not just the Hamas being just the, let's say, most important faction of about a dozen of various movements in Palestine, which range from left to right, including nationalists, some Islamists, some not, some are completely no political at all. So all this, the idea of the 7th of October was to bring the Palestinian question to the attention of the rest of the world. And in that sense, this worked, but probably not in the way the Palestinians expected. The idea, and we know that because everything has been written. So I'm not making here a speculation. This was stated by the Palestinians, by the spokesman of the Hamas during the first days of the Al-Aqsa flood operation. So we know that the idea was, through this spectacular action, to show the world that Palestinian resistance was still active, they could achieve something. And the action itself was supposed to show the world, or to remind the world, that there is a Palestinian question. The name of the operation, Operation Al-Aqsa, refers to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the Mount Temple, Temple of the Mount, or Mount of the Temple, sorry, in Jerusalem, that is also threatened of destruction by Israeli radical element who wants to rebuild the Temple of Solomon, and therefore, for that reason, to destroy the mosque. And that's the reason why it was called Al-Aqsa operation, meaning that the scope of the operation of the 7th of October 2023 goes much wider than just the action outside the fence, in which the Gazan population was in fact a prisoner. And in reality, it's not so much the operation as such that was brought to the attention of the world, but the reaction of Israel that was obviously beyond any, I would say, beyond human understanding. I'm not even mentioning humanitarian. Human. Everybody who has a sense of humanity has seen that Israel is taking advantage of the situation to destroy a population. I'm still amazed to see that the International Court of Justice, whose responsibility, given through the claim provided by the South Africa, against claiming that Israel is breaching the Convention for the Prevention of Genocide. Again, we are talking about prevention of genocide. We're not saying here, as historian, it was or not a genocide, because a lot of people tell you, well, there's not enough people to be a genocide. But the convention is about preventing the genocide, meaning that the whole idea of that, technically speaking, it's more complicated to realize, but technically, the idea, even the first victim of the genocide should be prevented. Even the first one may indicate a genocide. So it's not a matter of the number of people, as the Israelis try to bring to the when they try to explain and say, well, it's not a genocide because we don't have enough casualties. And you have a lot of governments saying the same thing. Well, there are not enough casualties to be a genocide. This is not the idea. The idea of preventing the genocide is to identify the first signs of a genocide in order to stop the process. That's the purpose of the convention. And I'm still amazed to see, but we know exactly why it is so, because one of the judges of the International Court of Justice is, in fact, religious-oriented and admits that what happens in Gaza is not a genocide. And for that reason, the Court of Justice has not yet decided that it could become a genocide, because that's the point. And therefore, we continue with that. We continue with the rhetoric. We continue with the narrative that, in fact, protect Israel. And this is extremely disturbing from those who, like me, have been active in the United Nations, have active for peace in the world as a military, because we see that there is let's say, total acceptance of the idea of massacring population. And when you go to countries such as UK, France, and Germany, who have a systemic, we can say it that way, systemic racism against the Arabs. And that's why also by the way, they also misbehave when they were in Iraq, Syria, Libya. They also bombed civilians. And in reality, that's, they are just returning the favor to Netanyahu, because when you criticize Netanyahu and you say, well, you are massacring civilians, Netanyahu says, well, but you have done exactly the same in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and Afghanistan. You see? So that means that misbehaving becomes an excuse to misbehave. And that's exactly what you see with the with the Western powers. And of course, this is not even mentioning the, I would say, outrageous support of US for anything that happens in Israel, that is dictated by domestic policy considerations more than the values that we are supposed to protect and to defend. And therefore we have kind of a corrupt West that is now supporting Israel, and in fact all the countries, because even if the idea of the recognition of the state of Palestine, for instance, we have seen that last month in the UN General Assembly, for a lot of countries it was kind of an excuse for doing nothing else. And therefore we have recognized Palestine, but we know that they are just words. It has not been accompanied by action to implement that. And in fact, it's an excuse for giving a blank check to Israel for the massacre of the population in Gaza. And in fact, you see that even if during the show that we had in Sharm el-Sheikh, where Donald Trump could portray himself as the peacemaker and things like that, and you had others like Emmanuel Macron or Meloni, they came here just to show how good they were. In fact, they have done nothing.
To be in the background.
Yeah, they were in the background, exactly. Keir Starmer. But they haven't done anything for that. I mean, if they had just the slightest dignity, they would have not gone to Sharm el-Sheikh, because they have virtually done nothing, literally nothing. And again, the recognition of the state of Palestine has absolutely no effect, and we see that today, by the way, absolutely no effect on the idea of a peace process. And all that shows that the West is now, in fact, the West is sitting between two chairs. The traditional chair, which is the support of Israel, the unconditional support of Israel, as it was promised by Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, and others to Israel. So this unconditional support is there. On the other hand, they are sitting on the other chair, which is their own population, because populations in the world, in the Western world, have started to understand what Israel is about. And we are reaching a point where this conflict, or the way Israel responded to the 7th of October, has put a very strange light, not just on Israel, but on the Jewish community at large. And for that reason, you have now anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic acts that are skyrocketing in the world.